This is what we're usually told a medieval peasant home looked like. A flimsy, miserable hovel of mud and straw. A dark, damp shelter for a primitive time. Historians often painted them as crude huts, built to last maybe a single generation, a temporary fix for a life of hardship. So why are over 3,000 of them still standing today? And that's not an exaggeration. New archaeological surveys have documented thousands of medieval houses built for common people still standing, many of them over 700 years old. Now, these aren't the glorified homes of wealthy landowners, these are the dwellings of the common farmer, the backbone of the feudal world. And they have survived. They've weathered storms, rot, and the relentless march of time, in many cases standing strong, while the stone manor houses of the lords who ruled over them have crumbled into ruin. And frankly, that presents a profound mystery. How, without modern tech, without engineering degrees, without even written blueprints, did supposedly uneducated peasants build homes that challenge our entire understanding of durability? New research is peeling back the layers of daub and timber to reveal a sophisticated survival technology hidden within these huts. A technology that allowed them to endure one of the most severe climate shifts in human history and create homes that were, in many ways, superior in their resilience. It turns out, we've been getting it all wrong. The story of the medieval peasant hut isn't one of primitive squalor. It's the story of a lost school of engineering, born from necessity and perfected over centuries, an empirical science that modern builders are only just beginning to appreciate. The climate crisis. To understand how these homes were built, you first have to understand why they were built that way. The defining challenge of the late medieval period wasn't just feudalism, it was the climate itself. Around the year 1300, Europe plunged into a period of dramatic cooling known as the Little Ice Age. And this wasn't a gentle slide into cooler autumns, it was a catastrophic environmental shift. Winters became brutally long, summers grew cool and wet, and the Thames River in London began to freeze over regularly, thick enough to support entire markets and festivals. The Great Famine of 1315, triggered by relentless rains and crop failures at the very onset of this cold snap, was a terrifying preview of what was coming. It killed an estimated 12% of Europe's entire population. Wheat prices in England exploded by 630%, forcing peasants to eat bread made from ground nutshells mixed with barley and oat flour. Chronicles from the period document cannibalism and child abandonment as communities collapsed under the strain. But this was just the beginning. The Little Ice Age would persist for over 400 years, bringing repeated waves of crop failures, livestock deaths, and human suffering. Alpine glaciers advanced over a kilometre, crushing entire villages in their path. The Baltic Sea regularly froze into a highway of ice, connecting Scandinavia to the European mainland. Temperature reconstructions show average winter temperatures dropping 2 Celsius below modern levels, a shift that meant the difference between survival and death for millions. In this brutal context, a peasant's house was not a status symbol. It wasn't about comfort, and it certainly wasn't about aesthetics. It was a critical piece of survival technology. Its primary function was to get a family, and often their livestock, through the punishing cold of winter alive. The home had to be a fortress against the cold and a bastion against the damp, using the most limited resources imaginable. Peasants didn't have access to vast quarries of cut stone. Their castles were made of the materials they could find within walking distance: wood from the Lord's forest, clay from the ground, and straw from the fields. Archaeological evidence from sites like Warham Percy in Yorkshire reveals layer upon layer of peasant dwellings, each generation building upon the ruins of the last, continuously refining their techniques through trial and error across centuries of climate extremes. Engineering revolution. The image of a peasant just flinging mud at sticks is a caricature that does a grave disservice to the methodical genius of these builders. Recent archaeological analysis has revealed construction techniques so sophisticated that modern engineers are studying them for insights into sustainable building practices. Modern construction tells us a building is only as strong as its foundation. A medieval peasant would have agreed, but their enemy wasn't just gravity, it was the cold, damp earth itself. Building directly on the ground was a recipe for disaster. Rot would consume timber posts in a few years, and the dampness would seep into the living space, stealing warmth and creating conditions for disease. Their solution was elegantly simple: get the house off the ground. Instead of sinking the main load-bearing posts directly into the earth where they would rot, they placed them on foundational cushions of stone. These pad stones, often just large flat stones, distributed the weight of the timber frame while keeping the vulnerable end grain of the wood clear of moisture. Excavations at medieval sites consistently reveal these stone foundations, some showing evidence of multiple rebuilds over centuries. This wasn't just about preventing rot, it was a form of passive thermal engineering that modern green building practices have rediscovered. By minimizing direct contact with the ground, they reduce thermal bridging, the process where cold is conducted from the ground into the structure. Think of it this way: a stone castle is basically a giant rock sitting in the cold earth, constantly pulling warmth out of the interior. A peasant's timber-framed house, perched on its stone footings, was thermally decoupled from the ground. Laboratory analysis of surviving medieval structures shows this elevation technique could improve interior temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees compared to ground contact construction. The Cruck Frame. If the foundation was the anchor, the timber frame was the skeleton. And in many of the most resilient houses, this skeleton used one of the most elegant and efficient structural systems in architectural history, the Cruck Frame. Recent dendrochronological analysis has identified over 3,086 surviving cruck-framed buildings across England, with dates ranging from the 1260s to the 1550s, a testament to both their durability and their prevalence. A cruck frame is a marvel of resourcefulness. Instead of building a rectangular box, the builders sought out trees with a natural, gentle curve. They would then split a single curved trunk down the middle, creating 2 symmetrical blades. These were raised and joined at the peak, forming a perfect A-frame. A series of these, connected by horizontal timbers, created the entire core of the building. What makes this so ingenious becomes clear when you analyze the material requirements. Detailed studies of surviving examples show that a typical peasant house required approximately 111 trees for construction, 8 large oak cruck blades from mature trees over 24 inches in diameter, plus dozens of smaller trees for studs, rafters and interior elements. Compare this to the heavy box-framed houses used by the nobility, which could require over 332 trees for a structure of similar size. Peasants, with their limited access to timber, had developed a system that achieved superior structural performance with a fraction of the materials. The structural efficiency is remarkable. In a cruck frame, the load from the roof is transferred directly down the curved blades all the way to the foundation. This means the exterior walls are not load-bearing, they are just infill panels, curtains against the weather. This design flexibility allowed for easier maintenance and modification, crucial advantages when dealing with the unpredictable stresses of the Little Ice Age climate. The A-frame geometry is inherently stable and flexible. During the ferocious winds and heavy snows of the Little Ice Age, this was a huge advantage. Engineering analysis shows that the curved cruck blades could flex under extreme loads without breaking, distributing stress along their entire length. Modern structural engineers recognize this as a principle now used in earthquake-resistant buildings. The medieval peasant had mastered it 7 centuries earlier, not through calculation, but through generations of observation and refinement. Wattle and Daub. With the skeleton in place, the next challenge was the skin, the walls. The common image is mud walls, but the reality was a sophisticated composite material known as wattle and daub. Recent scientific analysis of surviving panels reveals a level of material sophistication that rivals modern construction techniques. The process began with the wattle, a woven lattice of thin, flexible wood branches set between the main timbers. Archaeological evidence shows these were typically hazel, willow or cleft oak, chosen for their flexibility and resistance to decay. The weaving pattern varied by region, but analysis shows it was engineered to create maximum surface area for the daub to adhere to while maintaining structural integrity. The daub itself was the secret sauce, and laboratory analysis has revealed its true complexity. It was a carefully calibrated mix of clay for adhesion and thermal mass, sand to reduce cracking, a binding agent like straw or animal hair for tensile strength, and often animal manure. The manure wasn't just expedient, it was functional. The undigested fibers added to the wall's insulation and binding strength, while the ammonia may have acted as a preservative against insects and fungal growth. Thermal testing of wattle and daub panels from surviving medieval buildings shows remarkable insulation properties. The thousands of tiny air pockets and the sheer thermal mass of the wall absorbed heat slowly from interior fires and radiated it back at night, moderating the internal temperature. Measurements show that a properly constructed Wattle and Daub wall could maintain interior temperatures 8 to 10 degrees warmer than exterior conditions with minimal heating. The breathability of the system was equally crucial. Unlike modern walls sealed in plastic vapor barriers, Wattle and Daub is naturally vapor permeable. It allows moisture to pass through naturally, acting like a wick that draws moisture away from the structural timbers and lets it evaporate. This moisture management is a fundamental reason why these 700-year-old frames survive today when many modern timber structures rot within decades. Chemical analysis of daub samples reveals regional variations in composition, suggesting local adaptation and continuous refinement. Some areas added blood as a binder, others used lime, and coastal regions often incorporated salt-resistant additives. This wasn't primitive trial and error. It was sophisticated materials engineering adapted to local conditions and available resources. The thatched roof. The roof was the final line of defense, and here again, peasants turned a humble material straw, or reeds, into a high-performance system that modern sustainable building practices are rediscovering. A properly constructed thatched roof was a thick, carefully layered blanket, often 18 to 24 inches deep, requiring specialized knowledge and considerable skill to install and maintain. The engineering advantages were immense. First and foremost was insulation. Thatch is one of the best natural insulators available, with thermal properties that exceed many modern materials. Its secret is trapped air. The countless hollow stems create millions of tiny air pockets, providing a massive barrier to heat loss. Thermal imaging of occupied thatched buildings shows that even with roaring fires inside, the exterior surface of the thatch remains near ambient temperature, clear evidence that virtually no heat is being lost through the roof. The layering technique was crucial. Master thatchers developed regional styles that optimized for local climate conditions. The bottom layer, called the eaves course, was laid thick and tight to shed water rapidly. Successive layers were combed and aligned to create a weatherproof surface that could withstand decades of wind and rain. The ridge, where the two roof slopes met, required specialized techniques using twisted straw spars and weighted liggers to prevent wind uplift. Weatherproofing properties were equally impressive. A properly built thatched roof is completely waterproof. Its dense construction and steep pitch, typically 45 to 55 degrees, ensuring that driving rain simply cannot penetrate. Archaeological evidence from waterlogged sites shows that well-maintained thatch could last 40 to 60 years before requiring replacement, with regular maintenance extending its life even further. Snow load management was critical during Little Ice Age winters. The steep pitch allowed natural shedding of light snow, while the thick insulation prevented ice dam formation that could damage modern roofing systems. Historical accounts describe thatched roofs supporting snow loads that would collapse modern structures, testament to both the material strength and the framing system beneath. The integrated heating system. At the center of it all was the heating system, and here medieval peasants developed solutions that modern sustainable heating advocates are rediscovering. The earliest houses featured open hearths, fires lit on clay floors in the middle of the room, with smoke finding its own way out through gaps in the thatch or dedicated smoke holes. To modern sensibilities, this sounds unbearable, but archaeological evidence reveals the sophisticated reasoning behind this approach. The smoke wasn't just tolerated, it was harnessed as a preservation tool. Wood smoke, rich in chemicals like creosote and other compounds, effectively smoke-cured the entire structure. Analysis of timber from surviving medieval buildings shows penetration of these preservative compounds deep into the wood fibers, killing wood-boring insects and preventing fungal growth. This constant fumigation is a major factor in the incredible longevity of these buildings. Heat management was equally sophisticated. While modern heating systems focus on rapid heat delivery through forced air or radiant systems, the open hearth created a different thermal environment. The fire radiated heat in all directions, warming not just the air but also the thermal mass of the clay floor, the stone hearth, and the surrounding earth. This stored heat was released slowly throughout the night, maintaining more stable temperatures than rapid burn heating systems. The integration of livestock was a masterstroke of thermal engineering. Archaeological evidence from excavated longhouses shows that families and their animals often shared the same roof, separated only by a low partition or screen. A single cow generates approximately 1,500 BTUs per hour of body heat, equivalent to a small space heater running continuously. Multiple animals created a significant heating zone that helped warm the entire structure. Modern analysis shows this arrangement could raise interior temperatures by 5 to 8 degrees compared to human occupation alone. Chimney development represented a major technological advancement that spread gradually from the 12th century onward. The addition of a proper chimney and fireplace allowed for more controlled combustion and better smoke removal, but early adopters had to balance the improved air quality against the heat loss through the chimney. Archaeological evidence suggests many peasant houses went through multiple heating system upgrades over their lifespans, adapting to changing fuel availability and technological improvements. Regional innovations and adaptive solution. Analysis of surviving medieval peasant houses reveals significant regional variations, each adapted to local climate conditions, available materials, and specific challenges of the Little Ice Age. These weren't random differences, they represent sophisticated responses to environmental pressures that varied across Europe's diverse landscapes. In the harsh conditions of northern England and Scotland, excavations reveal houses that were partially underground, with living spaces excavated into hillsides or built into natural depressions. These earth-sheltered designs took advantage of the ground's stable temperature, typically 50–55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round below the frost line. Archaeological evidence from sites like the Orkney Islands shows entire communities of these semi-subterranean houses, with sophisticated drainage systems to prevent flooding and ventilation systems to manage air quality. Germanic regions developed the revolutionary Black House design, where the living area shared space with livestock under a single massive roof. Archaeological investigation of these structures reveals ingenious solutions for managing the challenges of mixed human-animal habitation. Drainage channels carved into stone floors directed animal waste away from human areas, while raised sleeping platforms kept families above the worst odors and moisture. The thermal benefits were substantial. German architectural historians calculate that a typical complement of livestock could contribute the equivalent of 3 to 4 continuously burning fires to the home's heating system. Coastal regions facing maritime climate challenges developed their own innovations. Excavations along the English coast reveal houses with specialized storm-resistant features, extra thick walls on the windward side, reinforced roof structures with additional tie-downs, and sophisticated drainage systems to handle wind-driven rain. Salt-resistant building materials were developed using local seaweeds and salt-tolerant plants as additives to the daub mixture. The most remarkable regional adaptation may have been the development of modular construction techniques in areas with limited timber resources. Archaeological evidence from parts of France shows peasant houses designed for disassembly and relocation, entire structures that could be taken apart, moved, and rebuilt elsewhere as conditions changed. This represents a level of systematic thinking about resource management and adaptability that challenges assumptions about medieval engineering capabilities. The architecture of superiority. Now we arrive at the central, provocative idea that in many critical ways, the humble peasant hut was a superior piece of engineering to the mighty stone castle. This isn't romanticism. It's supported by measurable evidence from archaeological investigation and modern engineering analysis. Consider the fundamental design philosophies. A castle's strength came from the sheer mass of its stone walls, but this was also its greatest weakness against the cold. Stone has very high thermal conductivity. It's essentially a giant heat sink, constantly leaching warmth from the interior. Thermal imaging of surviving castles shows that even with massive fireplaces burning continuously, interior stone surfaces remain near exterior temperatures. Archaeological evidence from castle sites consistently reveals thick layers of tapestries and hangings, not just decoration, but desperate insulation against the cold, damp stone. The structural vulnerabilities of masonry construction became apparent over time. Rigid stone and mortar are brittle under stress. Frost action, ground settlement, and thermal expansion create cracks that allow water penetration. Once water enters the masonry system, freeze-thaw cycles can catastrophically damage even the most massive walls. Archaeological surveys show that many castles fell into ruin not from war, but from neglect and the relentless assault of climate forces they were poorly designed to resist. In contrast, the peasant hut represented a completely different engineering philosophy: flexibility over rigidity, adaptation over resistance. The timber frame could flex and move with changing conditions. Where a stone wall would crack under stress, the timber frame would give slightly and return to its original position. Archaeological evidence shows that many medieval timber buildings survived ground settlement and seismic activity that would have destroyed masonry structures. The thermal performance differences are striking. Modern analysis shows that a well-built peasant house could maintain comfortable interior temperatures, with a fraction of the fuel required to heat a comparable stone structure. The combination of superior insulation, reduced thermal bridging, and efficient heat storage created a thermal environment that was both more comfortable and more sustainable. Maintenance requirements tell a similar story. Archaeological investigation of peasant house sites reveals evidence of continuous maintenance and improvement over generations. Worn daub could be repaired with locally available materials. Damaged timbers could be replaced without dismantling the entire structure. Thatch could be repaired section by section as needed. In contrast, stone construction required skilled masons and expensive materials for even minor repairs. Perhaps most importantly, the peasant house was designed for resilience and adaptation. Archaeological evidence from sites like Warren-Percy shows houses that were modified, expanded, and adapted continuously over their lifespans. Room layouts changed as families grew and shrank. Heating systems were upgraded as new technologies became available. The flexible nature of timber frame construction enabled this adaptability in ways that rigid masonry construction could not match. Modern rediscovery. The sophistication of medieval peasant building techniques isn't just historical curiosity. It's finding new relevance in contemporary sustainable construction and survival applications. Modern builders and researchers are rediscovering principles that peasants developed through centuries of trial and refinement during one of history's most challenging climate periods. Contemporary experimental archaeology has provided dramatic validation of medieval techniques. Pavel Sapochnikov's 2013-2014 experiment stands as perhaps the most compelling modern test. This Russian researcher spent 6 months of Siberian winter using only 9th century tools, clothing and shelter methods, documenting the entire experience in daily video logs that became the 2016 film Alone in the Past. His survival in conditions that regularly reached -40 LFF demonstrated the effectiveness of medieval preparation cycles and seasonal adaptation strategies, providing psychological insights into how historical communities managed the mental challenges of extreme seasonal isolation. Modern materials science has begun to analyze medieval building materials with sophisticated laboratory techniques. University College London researchers have tested Wattle and Daub samples from buildings dating to the 14th century, finding thermal and structural properties that exceed many contemporary materials. The natural fiber reinforcement, moisture management properties, and thermal mass characteristics of traditional daub compositions are now being studied for application in modern sustainable building systems. Architectural schools across Europe are incorporating medieval building techniques into their sustainable design curricula. The University of Nottingham's Archaeological Survey, which catalogued 3,086 surviving cruck-framed buildings, has become a resource for architects studying low environmental impact construction. These buildings represent the largest collection of pre-industrial sustainable architecture still in use, providing real-world performance data spanning centuries. The bushcraft and primitive skills communities have embraced medieval techniques as proven solutions for wilderness shelter construction. Modern practitioners regularly build wattle and daub structures using traditional methods, often completing functional shelters in 2 to 3 day workshops. YouTube channels devoted to primitive technology have millions of subscribers learning techniques that peasants used to survive the Little Ice Age. Contemporary sustainable building movements are rediscovering the advantages of natural materials and traditional construction methods. Straw bale construction, earth building, and timber framing, all direct descendants of medieval peasant techniques, are growing rapidly as alternatives to energy-intensive modern construction. The breathability, thermal mass, and low environmental impact of these traditional approaches address many of the problems created by modern sealed building systems. The enduring legacy. For centuries, we've pictured medieval peasants living in squalor, in flimsy hovels that were a testament to their primitive existence. But the evidence, preserved in the blackened oak of a cruck blade and the ancient daub of a 700-year-old wall, tells a different story. These weren't just huts. They were masterfully engineered structures, born from the crucible of the Little Ice Age and refined through generations of adaptation to climate extremes. The thousands of these homes still standing are not a historical anomaly. They are the surviving proof of a lost school of architecture that understood principles modern builders are only rediscovering. These builders were not primitive. They were survival engineers of the highest order, working within constraints that would challenge any modern architect. They understood that a building's true strength isn't always in its mass, but in its ability to flex and adapt. They knew that to stay warm, a house must first be able to breathe. They proved that sophisticated engineering doesn't require complex technology. It requires deep understanding of materials, climate, and human needs. The medieval peasant house represents more than historical curiosity. It demonstrates that sustainable, resilient design isn't the sole property of the 21st century. The solutions developed by peasant builders during the Little Ice Age, thermal efficiency, material sustainability, structural adaptability, and environmental responsiveness, address challenges that remain relevant today. Climate change, resource scarcity, and the need for resilient communities make these historical lessons increasingly valuable. Archaeological investigation continues to reveal new aspects of medieval building sophistication. Each excavation adds to our understanding of how these structures functioned as complete environmental systems, not just shelters. The integration of heating, ventilation, moisture management, and structural systems in medieval peasant houses represents a holistic approach to building that modern construction is struggling to rediscover. Looking forward, the rediscovery of these techniques opens up fascinating possibilities for modern application. The principles tested over centuries of climate extremes offer proven solutions for contemporary challenges. As we face our own climate uncertainties, the wisdom preserved in 700-year-old buildings provides both inspiration and practical guidance. These techniques are already inspiring new generations of builders, survivalists, and sustainable design advocates. From weekend bushcraft enthusiasts testing Wattle and Daub construction to architects incorporating Cruck Frame principles into modern designs, the influence of medieval peasant engineering extends far beyond historical study. The story of the medieval peasant house ultimately challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about progress, sophistication, and technological advancement. Sometimes the most elegant solutions have been standing right in front of us for centuries, waiting for us to see them, not as primitive huts, but as masterpieces of environmental adaptation and human ingenuity. So here's my question for you. Would you consider trying these ancient building techniques in your own projects? Whether it's a backyard experiment with Wattle and Daub, or incorporating some of these thermal principles into modern construction, what appeals to you most about this lost engineering tradition? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear which aspects of medieval building wisdom resonate with your own interests and challenges. If this deep dive into hidden historical engineering impressed you as much as it impressed me, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know about the past. There's so much more to discover about the ingenious solutions our ancestors developed for the challenges they faced. All research sources and archaeological references mentioned in this video are linked in the description below for those who want to explore these topics further.